Of course. Here's a rewritten version while keeping the original language. I remember that fateful day vividly, as though it were only yesterday, a summer day so oppressively hot that the air felt thick and suffocating. The blazing sun pounded down on the rooftop, intensifying the stifling atmosphere. Inside my small home, everything appeared calm on the surface, but beneath it all, a tempest was silently brewing, ready to unleash its fury. My name is Leah. I am 28 years old, a woman blessed with what many would consider an enviable life, a devoted husband, a secure job, and a warm, loving family. But perfection is an illusion, and I was about to discover that truth. Aiden, my husband, and I had been married for 3 years. Outwardly, our life seemed free of worries. We lived in a charming 2-story house with a quaint backyard garden. Aiden was a gentle soul, always affectionate and attentive. A true family man, he placed his loved ones above all else. My own career brought me fulfillment, giving me a creative outlet to explore my talents and passions. Our financial stability was secure, and everything seemed to flow seamlessly. We shared our home with Aiden's father, Mr. John, a man in his late 60s. Calm and wise, he was a figure of great respect. More than just a father-in-law, he was a trusted confidant and mediator. He had a special gift for diffusing the tension whenever Aiden and I found ourselves at odds, usually over the subject of children. Aiden yearned for a family filled with the laughter of little ones, while I wasn't ready. I wanted to focus on my career for a while longer, to pursue my ambitions before embracing motherhood. This disagreement became a constant source of debate between us. Despite our differences, our love remained strong. Aiden approached me with gentle persistence, while I tried my best to convey my perspective. Every argument ended with my father-in-law's calming guidance. His wisdom about mutual understanding and patience in family matters kept us grounded, reminding us that any challenge could be overcome with time and empathy. I truly believed our life would continue in this steady rhythm of peace and happiness. But one evening changed everything forever. That day began like any other, full of the usual busyness. I woke up earlier than usual to prepare breakfast for everyone. Aiden preferred a simple meal, a slice of bread and a cup of strong black coffee. I treated myself to a glass of warm milk. As always, my father-in-law sat quietly with his newspaper, sipping his morning tea. The kitchen was filled with its familiar warmth and the comforting aroma of breakfast. After cleaning up, I hurried to get ready for work. My job wasn't physically demanding, but it required sharp focus and energy. Dressed in a crisp white blouse, tailored pants, and a pair of modest heels, I felt poised and ready to face the day. I stopped by my usual coffee shop for a latte on my way to the office, savoring a brief moment of indulgence. Work that day was especially demanding. A string of back-to-back meetings left me with hardly a moment to breathe. I tackled emails, reports, and tasks with dedication, staying motivated by my deep passion for my career. At 5 o'clock, I packed my things and left the building. The golden rays of the setting sun cast a serene glow over the street, and I exhaled a long breath, relishing the calm after a hectic day. This version refines the original while maintaining its emotional tone, flow, and story elements. Of course. Here's a rewritten version, keeping the language in English. I stopped by a supermarket near my house to pick up some fresh ingredients. That evening, I wanted to prepare a more elaborate dinner than usual, as it had been a long time since the entire family had the chance to sit down and enjoy a relaxed meal together. When I got home, I headed straight to the kitchen. Aiden arrived shortly after and greeted me with a warm smile, offering to help set the table. The dinner menu was a comforting spread of hot chicken soup, aromatic grilled fish, and a vibrant stir-fried vegetable dish. My father-in-law, Mr. John, emerged from his study, clearly pleased to see the meal ready. We all sat together, sharing stories and laughter. Although minor disagreements about having children still lingered, these family dinners remained my most cherished moments. I never could have imagined that what followed this seemingly peaceful evening would unravel our lives completely. After dinner, I felt stifled and decided to take a shower. The cool water seemed to wash away the weight of my thoughts. Feeling refreshed, I slipped into my favorite cream-colored silk dress, the kind with a zipper running up the back. As I stood before the mirror, trying to pull up the zipper, it stuck halfway. No matter how much I tried, It wouldn't budge. I stepped into the living room to ask Aiden for help, but it was empty. Aiden, where are you? I called, but silence answered. Mr. John, seated in his armchair with a book, looked up at me. Aiden stepped out for a bit. What's the matter, dear? I hesitated, my cheeks warming. The zipper on my dress is stuck. I can't pull it up. Could you help me? He set his book aside and rose. Let me take a look. He approached with his usual calm demeanor. I lowered my head slightly to give him better access as his strong hands reached for the zipper. It's caught on the fabric, he murmured, tugging gently. With a sudden snap, the zipper freed itself, and to my horror, the silk dress slipped to the floor in a whisper. I stood frozen, my mind blank with shock. Neither of us moved. Mr. John turned sharply, his voice laden with regret. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Shaking, I snatched up the dress and covered myself. My hands trembled as I stammered. It's fine, Dad. The dress was loose. That's all. I couldn't meet his eyes. He backed away, visibly shaken, and cleared his throat. Fix it yourself. Wait for Aiden to come back and ask him. He turned abruptly and left the room, leaving me alone, my heart racing with a suffocating mix of shame and confusion. Heat rushed to my face, a flush of embarrassment that seemed to sear my skin. My mind spun as I stood there, utterly bewildered and overwhelmed by what had just transpired. This version maintains the essence of the original while enhancing flow and emotional impact. Certainly, here's a rewritten version of the passage in English, preserving its meaning and emotional intensity. That evening, I couldn't shake my unease. Every time I recalled the regretful expression on Mr. John's face, a weight settled heavily on my heart. I had no idea what was running through his mind, which only made my anxiety worse. Aiden arrived home late, cheerful and oblivious, his laughter filling the house as if nothing had happened. I tried to act normal, forcing myself to join the conversation during dinner, but my thoughts were tangled, my heart restless. Later, I retreated to the bedroom, lying on the bed and staring blankly at the ceiling, my mind replaying the events over and over again. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle but undeniable changes in Mr. John. He no longer spoke to me with the same ease, his words clipped and formal. He avoided my gaze whenever we crossed paths, his behavior a stark contrast to the warm, open rapport we used to share. Conversations that once flowed effortlessly had disappeared, replaced by silence and discomfort. The tension weighed on me, but I didn't know how to break through it, afraid to address the unspoken rift between us. Yet there were moments when I caught him watching me, his eyes searching as though looking for answers. When I noticed his gaze lingering, I would quickly turn away, pretending not to see, my heart racing like a trapped bird. His eyes, once filled with kindness and familiarity, now held something I couldn't quite name, something that unsettled me to my core. I tried to convince myself that time would smooth the cracks and return things to normal. But no matter how much I reassured myself, the sense of dread only grew stronger. I became acutely uncomfortable whenever we were alone together. I took careful steps to avoid unnecessary interactions, excusing myself from conversations that no longer felt safe. Family dinners, which I had once cherished, now felt like suffocating rituals, each moment filled with unspoken tension. An invisible wall had risen between us, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, the truth was undeniable. My relationship with Mr. John had changed beyond recognition. I told myself repeatedly that time would heal the unseen fractures. But I was wrong. One morning, I woke with a sore throat, my head spinning, and a lingering sense of fatigue. A quick check confirmed a mild fever. Aiden had already left for work, so I decided to stay home and rest. Mr. John was still in the house, likely holed up in his study as usual, reading or occupied with his own matters. I stayed in bed for a while, exhaustion pulling at me, but the heat of the room grew unbearable. Hoping to find relief, I ventured into the living room for fresh air. Dressed simply in loose pajamas, my hair unkempt and my skin pale, I shuffled into the room. Mr. John sat in his usual chair, his eyes fixed intently on his phone. I greeted him softly, but he didn't respond right away. When he finally looked up, his expression was strange, his eyes sharp rather than kind. Not feeling well? His voice was louder than usual, almost abrupt. Yes, just a mild fever, I replied, doing my best to seem composed. He nodded but said nothing more, his gaze lingering on me with a strange intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I felt his eyes probing, searching for something hidden within me, and it made my skin crawl with discomfort. I turned to leave, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere, when his voice cut through the silence. "Leah, come here. I need to talk to you." I froze mid-step, dread tightening its grip around my chest. Slowly, I turned back to face him, my pulse quickening as an inexplicable sense of foreboding settled over me. Mr. John stood, his eyes locked on mine with unsettling resolve. The air between us thickened, heavy and suffocating. My palms began to sweat, my heart pounding in my ears as I waited. "Leah," he whispered, his voice low and deliberate, "you are stunning." The words hit me like a blow, each syllable cutting deep into my heart. Time seemed to stand still. I felt the strength drain from my legs, my entire body trembling with cold dread. The room around me seemed to spin as his words echoed in my mind, sharp and undeniable. My breath caught in my throat, a nightmare unfolding before my eyes, and I stood there, trapped in a waking terror I couldn't escape. Here is a rewritten version of the passage, keeping the original meaning and intensity in English. The painful confession. "Dad, what are you saying?" My voice trembled, caught between shock and disbelief. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved closer, each step making the space around me feel smaller, more suffocating. His eyes never wavered from mine, dark and unwavering. Calm but resolute, he said, "Leah, just let me look at you one more time." I stood there, frozen, my mind refusing to accept what I had just heard. My eyes widened, searching his face for any trace of humor, any sign that this was a cruel joke. But it wasn't. His intense, sorrowful gaze left no room for doubt. "Dad," my voice rose sharply as I struggled to maintain my composure. "How can you say such a thing? Don't you feel guilty about Aiden?" He hesitated, confusion flickering across his face, but his eyes remained locked on mine, filled with a pained earnestness. "Leah," he whispered, his tone desperate, pleading, "I don't know what's happened to me. Since that day, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you." I took a step back, my body screaming for distance, for safety. "Dad, this is wrong. Completely wrong," I said, my voice breaking. "You're destroying this family. I'm your daughter-in-law." "I know," he interrupted, his voice briefly louder before softening again, trembling with anguish. "I understand, but I can't control it. I can't stop this feeling." "Dad!" I nearly shouted, the tremor in my voice matched only by the tears beginning to fall down my face. "I don't want to hear it. I can't understand how you could even think such things. I can't believe it." Mr. John stood still, his eyes finally dropping to the floor as if carrying a burden too heavy to bear. His shoulders sagged, and his voice, filled with torment, broke the silence. "Leah, I don't know why it's come to this. I'm sorry, but I can't keep lying to myself anymore." I felt paralyzed, terror coursing through me, my legs refusing to obey my instinct to flee. He stepped closer, his movements slow, deliberate, each one dragging me deeper into a nightmare. His eyes, conflicted, pained, held me captive, as if seeking salvation where there was none. I tried to back away, but the small table behind me pressed into my back, cutting off my escape. "I know this is wrong," he whispered, his voice filled with the weight of 1,000 regrets. "But this feeling is tearing me apart. I don't want to hurt you, but since that day, I can't think of anything else." My heart raced so violently I thought it might burst from my chest. "Dad, do you even hear what you're saying?" I cried out, the anguish thick in my voice. "This will destroy everything. We can't do this. It's wrong." He stopped inches from me, his eyes overflowing with sorrow and hopelessness. "I know, Leah. I know," he said quietly. "But I can't turn back. You feel it too, don't you?" His words sliced into me like a blade. I shook my head violently, desperate to deny it, but my body betrayed my mind. His gaze was not forceful, but filled with a broken vulnerability that stripped me of my defenses. I felt like a rag doll, torn between fear and a dangerous, nameless pull. The room faded away, sounds dissolved into silence. He moved even closer, the gap between us vanishing as if it had never existed. I didn't step back. The boundaries I had clung to shattered like glass, and I felt myself slipping, falling into a chasm where reason and morality had no hold. When it was over, I collapsed into a chair, my hands trembling uncontrollably. My chest heaved with ragged breaths, but the horror filling my heart now was deeper than any resistance I had felt before. Disgust, guilt, and shame surged within me, poisoning every corner of my soul. I had betrayed everyone I loved. I had destroyed my own world. Leah, his voice was heavy with emotion, cracking with unspoken pain. No, I said sharply, my words trembling with finality. Don't speak. Don't say anything else. I forced myself to stand, though my legs felt as if they would buckle under me. My steps toward the door were hurried, driven by an overpowering need to escape. When my hand touched the cold metal of the doorknob, his voice reached me one last time. Leah, I'm sorry, so sorry. I didn't look back. Tears streamed down my face as I fled, regret and despair suffocating my heart. I had shattered everything, and there was no way to piece it back together. I didn't know how I could face myself, how I could face Aiden or Mr. John. After what had happened, the ruin of what was could never be undone. Here's a rewritten version of the passage while keeping the original meaning intact. The agony of conflict. That night, I lay awake in bed, my mind trapped in an endless loop of memories and emotions. Images, words, and feelings swirled relentlessly, refusing to let me rest. I kept asking myself how everything had spiraled so far out of control. How could we ever face this reality? There were no answers, none for me, and perhaps none for Mr. John either. Shame, guilt, pain, and panic consumed me, binding me in a cycle of torment from which I could not escape. I felt utterly powerless. In the days that followed, I lived in a state of constant agony. The thought of confessing everything to Aiden haunted me, an ever-present specter in my mind. Yet every time I imagined the conversation, helplessness overcame me. If Aiden ever discovered the truth, his relationship with his father would be shattered beyond repair. That sacred bond between father and son, irrevocably broken. I didn't want to destroy Aiden's world, but I also couldn't bear the weight of this deception forever. I was caught between two unbearable choices, each carrying devastating consequences. I kept my pain locked inside, burying my shame beneath a mask of normalcy. But the more I suppressed it, the more suffocated I felt. My life became a performance, and I was forced to play my part with perfect precision, even as my heart splintered. It was a fragile illusion, and I lived in constant fear of the moment when everything would collapse. Though I was surrounded by people I loved, I had never felt so desperately alone. The realization came slowly but undeniably. The only way to prevent complete ruin was to leave. If I walked away, I might still be able to salvage what remained of this family. Quietly, I began making plans. I resolved to act as though nothing had changed, concealing my intentions until I found the courage to speak. Every day, I prepared breakfast, cleaned the house, and forced myself to smile. But inside, my decision was final. I was like a wounded creature, hiding my pain in the shadows while trying to protect myself and those I loved. I started searching for houses far away, combing through job listings in distant places. A fresh start seemed like my only salvation, a place where I could bury the past and rebuild a life untouched by shame. I knew the road ahead would be fraught with difficulty, but I saw no other path forward. I stood at a crossroads, unsure which direction to take, clinging only to a fragile hope that this choice would lead to healing. One evening after dinner, I sat waiting in the living room, nerves trembling beneath a composed exterior. Aiden, I called softly, keeping my voice steady. I need to talk to you. He glanced up, concern flickering in his eyes. What's wrong? Is something the matter? I drew in a breath, willing my heart to slow. I think we should move. I believe starting fresh somewhere else would be better for both of us. Aiden's brows furrowed in confusion. Why would you say that? We're happy here. Is something bothering you? I shook my head, forcing a small smile. No, it's nothing serious. I just think it's time we had our own space. Aiden placed a hand on my shoulder, his expression serious and gentle. Leah, I can tell something's wrong. You don't need to hide it from me. Please, just tell me. Before I could respond, Mr. John descended the stairs, having heard everything. His voice was calm, yet firm with purpose. Leah's right, Aiden, he said. I think it's best if you two move out and start building your life together. You shouldn't stay here forever. Aiden turned to his father, his eyes filled with surprise and worry. But Dad, I don't want to leave you. I thought we were happy living together. Mr. John gave him a soft, knowing smile, his hand resting gently on Aiden's shoulder. You don't have to worry about me. I'm fine. This is about you and Leah. You both need to decide what's best for your future. Here's a rewritten version of the passage while keeping the original meaning. The decision to leave. Aiden sat in silence for a long time, his expression gradually softening. At last, he gave a small nod. If that's what you think is best, Dad, I'll go along with it. But I'll visit often, I promise. I said nothing. I only lowered my head, the weight of sadness and relief pressing on my chest. I knew why Mr. John was doing this, why he was helping me. This was his way of making amends, his attempt to hold the family together. He had accepted my departure as the only way forward and was willing to sacrifice his own happiness to protect what he loved most. I felt both grateful for his generosity and sorrowful for the hand life had dealt him. As night descended, I stood alone in my room, staring out the window into the darkness. A hollow ache filled me. Leaving was the right decision. I was certain of that, but certainty didn't lessen the sadness or the guilt that clung to me like a shadow. I was walking away from a chapter of my life, leaving behind pieces of myself. It felt like betrayal, a coward's escape from responsibility. But deep down, I knew I had no other choice. Leaving was the only way to save this family, the only way to save myself. In the days that followed, Aiden and I packed up our lives. We folded memories into cardboard boxes, closing one door and preparing to open another. We had found a modest apartment in a distant city, and Aiden had secured a new job. The transition happened fast, too fast. I buried myself in the tasks at hand, trying not to think about the past. But memories are relentless. They crept in during quiet moments, dragging me into the darkness of despair. I felt like I was living between two worlds, one real, one a haunting mirage of what used to be. The morning of our departure arrived. I stood before Mr. John, awkward and heavy-hearted. He said little, but his eyes, deep with sadness and regret, spoke volumes. My throat tightened. The words I wanted to say lodged painfully inside. I couldn't find my voice. Gratitude, pity, sorrow, and disappointment all tangled within me. I felt the urge to embrace him, to hold on to something familiar. At the same time, I wanted to turn and run as far away as I could. I knew in my heart that our relationship would never be the same, and that realization cut deeply. As Aiden and I drove away, I glanced back at the house, the home that had sheltered so many moments of our lives. Through the rearview mirror, it faded into the distance, taking with it a piece of my soul. The memories would never leave me, but I knew I had to move forward. I had to build something new, and above all, I had to learn to forgive myself. The road ahead would be long and unforgiving, but I was ready to begin. The drive stretched on in heavy silence. Aiden's gaze flickered toward me now and then, his eyes full of quiet concern. He didn't speak, and I was thankful for his restraint. He was hurting too, I could feel it, but he was trying to be strong, to hold us both up. I was grateful for his strength. At the same time, guilt gnawed at me. I had dragged him into this storm, and I feared that my betrayal had caused irreparable damage. Would he ever be able to forgive me? I wasn't sure. The city we were heading to was foreign, far removed from everything we had known. I had no illusions about an easy recovery. I only hoped that a fresh start might offer us a chance to heal. When we arrived, the apartment was stark and unfamiliar. It felt cramped, a plain and hollow shell, compared to the warmth of the house we'd left behind. Still, I clung to the thought that this was a new beginning. This was where we could begin to mend. Over the next few days, we unpacked our lives, filling the empty spaces with furniture and fragile hope. We hung curtains, arranged the few belongings we had brought, and did our best to turn the space into a home. But the weight of memory lingered. Laughter once filled our lives with Mr. John, comfort woven through the fabric of family. The echoes of that life haunted every corner of this new one. Here's a rewritten version of the passage, preserving its original meaning. The first few weeks were a struggle. I threw myself into work, trying to build a routine that could distract me. But when the day ended and I was left alone with my thoughts, the memories would flood back. Every night, I relived the events that had led to this moment. I couldn't sleep. Food tasted like nothing. The haunting images of that night followed me everywhere. Questions swirled endlessly in my mind. Why did it happen? How did I allow myself to fall so far? There were no simple answers. The harder I tried to piece together the chain of events, the more I realized how many small choices had brought me here. Aiden, however, refused to let me drown in my pain. He tried to lift my spirits, cracking jokes, dragging me out for walks, and surprising me with little gifts. "We'll get through this," he would say, his voice full of quiet conviction. "I'll always be here for you." His warmth and selflessness touched me deeply. But guilt gnawed at my heart. I wasn't being completely honest with him. I hadn't told him the full truth about his father. Fear of his reaction paralyzed me. I knew that once he knew everything, he would never be the same. Over time, the heaviness began to ease. I found joy in small, simple things. I started exercising, eating better, and setting new goals for myself. Seeking help from a therapist was a turning point. She helped me untangle the web of emotions I had buried for so long. Healing was slow, but it came. Little by little, I gained clarity about my role in what had happened. The reflection brought pain, but also understanding. A few months into our new life, Aiden told me he wanted to visit his father. The idea filled me with dread, but I knew this was something he had to do, and something I needed to face as well. So we booked a flight back to the city we had left behind. As the departure date loomed, it felt as though I was walking toward my own execution. I didn't know how Aiden or Mr. John would react when they saw me. The uncertainty gnawed at my nerves. When we arrived at the house, it felt as though no time had passed. The garden still carried the same familiar scent. The furniture sat unchanged, the walls silently holding stories we had left behind. Even Mr. Hoff, John's old chair, remained in its place. When he opened the door, a mixture of sadness and relief flickered across his face. His eyes spoke of loneliness and a heavy heart. We exchanged quiet greetings before Aiden and I stepped inside. I left him to be with his father, retreating to the living room with my own swirling thoughts. Every step felt like pacing the edge of a decision. Should I speak to him? Should I finally confront what had been left unsaid? Aiden and Mr. John disappeared into the study, their voices muffled behind closed doors. I couldn't make out their words, but their conversation hung in the air like something sacred. Anxiety tightened my chest. I felt like an intruder in a space meant only for the two of them. Minutes passed, or perhaps hours. I couldn't tell. Finally, Aiden returned. "We're going out for lunch," he said softly. "Come with us." When Mr. John appeared, his gaze didn't meet mine. He simply nodded, a brief, wordless gesture toward the door. I followed silently, the unspoken weight between us growing heavier with every step. As I slid into the car, I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead, my thoughts a storm of things I could not say. Here's a rewritten version of the passage with the same meaning. Lunch was heavy with silence. Aiden made several attempts to start a conversation, but the words faded before they could take root. I forced myself to be polite, but a deep discomfort sat in my chest. At one point, Mr. John looked at me, then lowered his eyes to his plate. A tear slipped down his cheek. I felt pity stir within me, but I fought to keep it from overwhelming me. After lunch, we returned to the house, and Aiden pulled me aside, his expression serious. "I need to talk to my dad privately," he said. I nodded, a familiar dread settling in my stomach. I paced the living room as they spoke, my thoughts racing. What are they talking about? Will I have to face him soon? The conflicting urges to run and to confront the truth battled inside me. Minutes felt like hours. When Aiden finally emerged, the worry on his face told me everything. "He wants to see you," he murmured. My heart dropped. The moment I had dreaded had arrived. Taking a steadying breath, I stepped into the study. Mr. John sat slouched in his chair, his gaze fixed on the floor. The room was stifling with the weight of unspoken words. The silence pressed against my ears. I had no idea how to begin. But then, in a voice thick with sorrow, Mr. John broke the stillness. "Leah," he began softly, his words trembling. I want to apologize. What I did was unforgivable. I hurt you deeply, and I've lived with that pain every day. I am truly sorry." I stood frozen, caught between shock and pain. I had expected defensiveness or anger, anything but this raw remorse. My emotions churned wildly. Could I forgive him? I didn't know. But I stayed, forcing myself to listen. I sank into the chair opposite him, struggling to keep my composure. In recent months, my strength had felt like a fragile illusion. The pain and rage I carried weighed heavily on every word I spoke. Tears welled in his eyes as he continued. I've hated myself for what I did. It was madness, a terrible lapse in judgment that shattered everything. I lost your trust, Aiden's trust. I destroyed my family. I understand if you can never forgive me. I just needed to tell you that I regret it all. I'm so sorry. The rawness of his words hung between us. I inhaled deeply, searching for calm. I believe you regret what you did, I said at last, my voice trembling. But regret doesn't undo the betrayal. You broke my trust. You broke Aiden's trust. You broke our family. It will take time, maybe a lifetime, to heal. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you, but I hope one day I will. His head dipped again. I know, he whispered. I don't expect forgiveness. I only wanted you to know how sorry I am. I'll carry this regret for the rest of my life. For the first time, I truly looked at him. His shoulders sagged under the weight of his guilt. He was a hollowed-out version of the man I once knew. He had lost his light, his strength. A wave of unexpected sorrow washed over me. Even after all he had done, I couldn't help but feel sorry for him. At that moment, I knew leaving had been the right choice. We spoke for a while longer. Mostly, I poured out my pain, and he listened. Silent, sorrowful, never making excuses. When I finally stood to leave, he nodded one last time, and I walked out. Aiden was waiting, his eyes full of concern. I didn't say anything. I just wrapped my arms around him and held on, letting the tears come. We left shortly after, the weight of the visit clinging to my shoulders. On the drive to the airport, I told Aiden everything that had happened. His silence unnerved me, but then he squeezed my hand and looked at me with unwavering tenderness. We'll get through this, he said. It won't be easy, but together we'll heal. When we finally returned to our apartment, exhaustion washed over me. The trip had drained me emotionally and physically, but alongside the weariness came a sense of relief. I had faced my past. I had spoken my truth. The road to healing would be long and uncertain, but I wasn't walking it alone. Aiden was beside me, and together I knew we could face whatever lay ahead. Here's the rewritten version of the passage with the same meaning. The long road to healing. In the months that followed, we devoted ourselves to rebuilding our lives. We immersed ourselves in work, rediscovered hobbies, and nurtured our friendships. I continued seeing my therapist, who guided me through understanding my emotions and mastering strategies to manage my anxiety. Yoga and meditation became my companions, teaching me the art of finding peace and stillness within. Gradually, I began to heal. Piece by piece, I started to feel whole again. Aiden had his own journey of healing. He never let bitterness or resentment cloud his love for me, but I could see that the pain lingered within him too. His connection with his father remained tenuous, sparse, stilted conversations that were painful for both. They were learning to live with the fractured pieces of their relationship, and it was far from easy. I stood by Aiden, offering silent strength as he searched for his own peace, knowing that normalcy wouldn't return overnight. One day, my therapist asked, "What have you learned from all of this?" The question made me pause. Reflection brought clarity. I had learned so much. The critical importance of setting boundaries, the danger of allowing emotions to dictate actions, the immense power of forgiveness, and the profound freedom that comes with letting go. But above all, I had learned about the unbreakable resilience of the human spirit. We can endure the unimaginable and still rise. Looking back, I realized I had no regrets about leaving. It was the hardest choice I had ever made, but also the right one. Staying would have only deepened the damage, leaving me trapped in misery. Walking away reclaimed my life and allowed healing to begin for everyone. Leaving wasn't just an act of survival. It was an act of love and protection. A year after the move, I felt a pull to reach out to Mr. John. I didn't know if he would welcome my words, but my heart told me it was time. I wanted him to know that I was okay, and I hoped he was too. I poured my thoughts into a letter, sharing how I had moved forward and thanking him for his apology. I wrote that I had accepted it. Then I sent the letter and waited, uncertain if a reply would ever come. Weeks later, his response arrived. A short, emotion-laden note. He thanked me for my kindness and shared that he was trying to move forward as well. Each day, he carried the weight of his actions but was working toward forgiving himself. His gratitude for my words and my strength was evident. As I read his letter, tears streamed down my face. A sense of closure filled me, followed by an overwhelming peace. Life will never be perfect. Perfection isn't the goal. But now I had the tools and the strength to meet life's challenges. There would always be highs and lows, moments of triumph and days of struggle, but I knew I could face them with resilience, determination, and love. I had learned how fiercely I valued my family, and I embraced the responsibility of protecting them with unwavering conviction. My story isn't a fairy tale. It's a tale of pain and loss, but also of forgiveness and healing. It's a reflection of our human condition, our capacity to love, to hurt, to make mistakes, and to learn. I share my journey in the hope that it will touch those facing similar battles. Choose the path of least harm, and remember that letting go liberates not only yourself, but also preserves the very principles you cherish. Life is a long road, and I've made a vow to never lose my way again. Thank you for listening to my story. If this video brought meaning or value to your life, please like and subscribe to the channel. Every like and subscription helps me share stories that matter. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, share the video with them. Thank you for your support. I couldn't do this without you.